Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Hour of Devastation spoilers. And things are sort of wrapping up as far as spoilers are concerned. We have two rares to talk about today, and a few semi-sweet uncommons, but let's get right into it. First off, we have Hour of Eternity, and this is one of the more unique cards we've seen in quite a while. So 3 blue and double X, so very expensive, but it basically lets you eternalize X creatures from your graveyard. So you get a copy of them that's a 4/4 black zombie. So on one hand, this card is super unique because it's pretty much the closest thing we've seen to blue reanimation maybe ever. Of course, there's upsides and downsides. As far as reanimating stuff, it's much worse with big stuff, so unlike a typical reanimation deck, you're not necessarily looking to get some really huge creature in your deck because it's going to be a 4/4 anyway. On the other hand, it's better with small creatures because they get a bonus actually by coming back as a 4/4 rather than a drawback of being reduced down to a 4/4. So I think the big thing here is, like the other Eternalize cards, it's exciting because you get to take advantage of enter the battlefield abilities. So stuff like Rogue Refiner coming back as a 4/4 and drawing you a card, or Cloud Blazer as a 4/4 flyer that also draws you 2 cards and gains you life, or even Noxious Gearhulk. Yes, it's a slight downgrade, you lose a power, but you're killing a creature. So I think that that's mostly where Hour of Eternity fits in Standard. I think you want to take advantage of the fact that you can abuse these enter the battlefield triggers. Just using it as a reanimate a bunch of stuff thing is kind of questionable because it's so expensive. If you're not getting enter the battlefield triggers, I think you really got to cast it for 9 mana before the deal's worth it. The easiest way to take advantage of it and to reduce the cost of it in some weird way is to get back things with enter the battlefield abilities, which means we can potentially build a interesting new build of Panharmonicon where we can get back our enter the battlefield abilities from the graveyard with Hour of Eternity, which leads to all kinds of interesting potentials. And it's nice that it's on curve. Panharmonicon turn 4, turn 5, we can potentially eternalize something, start getting double triggers, drawing us more cards to find more Hour of Eternities, making more land drops to make our next Hour of Eternity even bigger. So there's some neat synergy there. Whether or not this would actually make Panharmonicon a tier deck remains to be seen. It's kind of suffered since Reflector Mage was banned, but I think it gives you some really fun, interesting things you can do with Panharmonicon and enter the battlefield triggers in Standard. Maybe the best comparison that I found for Hour of Eternity is it really is very close to the blue version of Entreat the Angels. You get 4/4s, it's 3 colored mana and double X. The downside of Hour of Eternity is you don't have the miracle cost, and that's where Entreat the Angels really shines, and Hour of Eternity never gets a miracle cost, so it's never going to be cheaper. That was the power of Entreat the Angels. The upside was you miracle it, and suddenly it's an insane deal. You're getting 8 power and toughness for 4 mana, and it flies, it's so good. But as far as casting at full cost, Hour of Eternity is very comparable, and it does have the upside, as we've been talking about, of taking advantage of enter the battlefield triggers, which Entreat the Angel could never do. So, super fun card. Awesome in Commander. Do really cool, unique things. I want to play it alongside Panharmonicon in Standard with Cloud Blazers and stuff, but as far as being a competitive card in Standard, I think it's just too expensive. It's too much mana to make it a good deal, and we have Ever Afters and other reanimation effects in the format. If you want to go on the go big reanimation plan, you'd much rather do that and just get back a 10/10 Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger rather than a 4/4 copy of it. Next up, we have Hazaret's Undying Fury, which is a super interesting card. The red member of the your lands don't untap your next turn cycle, and it's really crazy. So basically 6 mana, you shuffle your library, exile the top 4, and you can cast any number of non-land cards with converted mana cost, 5 or less from among them without paying your mana cost. And then of course your lands don't untap. So there's a lot to break down here. This was not at all what I predicted for the red member of this cycle, or anyone. I don't think anyone considered this. So of course, it goes along with Bantu's Last Reckoning, Oketra's Last Mercy, Ronus' Last Stand. The downside is it's super expensive, and it has a ton of drawbacks. The easiest comparison is the red Mind Desire, but a fixed red Mind Desire, because you can't really go super deep. because you only get the top 4 cards, and then it also limits what you can cast. So you can't just flip this into an Ulamog or anything super crazy, so it limits its potential there. Also, the fact that it's 5 or less means you can't flip into another copy of Hazoret's Undying Fury and repeat the process, keep going, chaining them together, doing it again. So there's really very minimal ways or no ways to really combo off with this card. So if we look at what this card really does, if you consider that a typical standard deck is going to have maybe 23, 25 lands, most of the time you're going to hit 2 non-land cards with your Hazoret's Undying Fury. And I think the dream scenario is you get like a Chandra and a Verdurous Gearhulk, you spend 6 mana, you end up with 9 mana worth of spells, something along those lines. Of course, you can just get super lucky and hit 4 non-land cards, and it's super awesome. But on average, I think that's like the top end of average, is hitting 2, 4, or 5 mana cards. That's kind of like as good as it normally will be. On the other hand, it can be super bad as well. You cast it for 6 mana, get a Harness Lightning, maybe your opponent doesn't have any creatures, a Servant of the Conduit, which, you know, for 6 mana, you want a little more than that. And the big problem is it's just so unbelievably random that you can't control it at all. You shuffle your library, so there's no stacking your deck. So I think that this is by far the worst of the cycle. I think it's actually pretty much unplayable in Standard, and probably every other format as well, if it didn't have quite as many restrictions, like the converted mana cost restriction. Then it would be worth talking about, because it already has the big downside of your lands not untapping. So I think if it was a little bit lower in restrictions, then it would probably be good, but you can tell that Wizards went extra safe with this one, and put a ton of different safety valves to make sure you couldn't do anything broken with it, and it's not a real mind's desire. So I think the only place I could imagine this seeing play would be some random theme commander deck. Otherwise, Hazoret's Undying Fury probably going to be sticking on the sidelines. Our other rare of the day is Endless Sands, another desert land, and this one is a little bit strange. So for 2, you can exile a creature that you control, and then for 4, you can sacrifice it and return all the creatures that were exiled onto the battlefield under its owner's control. So you get all your creatures back. So this is basically an updated version of Safe Haven. Safe Haven is actually pretty close to the exact same card. Endless Sands, mostly better because it actually makes mana. It's really hard to play lands that don't make mana unless they're super powerful, and Safe Haven isn't that powerful. So there's some nice upside there. The opportunity cost is low because it makes mana. It is a desert, which is relevant, and I think the main purpose here is you just use it to save your stuff from removal. Your opponent goes to Fatal Push your Thought-Knot Seer, you can exile it instead, or your Reality Smasher, whatever. You name a creature, you can save it. You can save a creature from a Fumigate, and then eventually in the late game, maybe you don't have anything to do, you're kind of top decking, you draw a land, then you can just spend your turn getting back all the creatures you exiled earlier in the game. So the other possibility, and I don't think this is really a good possibility, but you can use Endless Sands like a really slow Flicker Wisp type effect. It's just so much mana though, if your plan is to blink things for value, that you gotta leave up 3 mana essentially to activate it, because you have to tap Endless Sands itself, and then it's 5 mana to get everything back. And while it's nice that you have control over when you do it, unlike Safe Haven, it's just so much mana to go down this plan. I think I could imagine playing it as just a low opportunity cost card because it's a land, because it comes into play untapped, and maybe getting random value from it. But I don't think it's strong enough or fast enough or cheap enough to really be like, oh, I'm going to build an Endless Sands deck. I just think it's not efficiently costed enough to really do that. But I could definitely imagine playing it in the Panharmonicon deck we were talking about just as a random value card that we'd have access to. Maybe we never activate it and we never have the opportunity, but when everything goes wrong and we don't have any action, don't have anything to do, we can get some random value from Endless Sands, and it doesn't cost us that much to have in our deck because it's a land, it comes into play untapped. Also, desert synergies is a thing. We still don't really know if deserts can be a real deck in Standard, but if they are a deck, Endless Sands could definitely be a part of it. Moving on, we have a handful of uncommons to wrap things up. Razaketh's Ritual is our new tutor, although it's named Ritual, which caused a bit of controversy when it was spoiled. It is a little strange to have a tutor with the name Ritual, but it's basically a diabolic tutor that costs 1 more mana, but has the upside of cycling, mostly with Razaketh's Ritual. I want to play it in the New Perspectives deck. I think that that's the home where this card can really shine for a few reasons. First off, it cycles. New Perspectives just wants cycling cards. The bar for being a cycler in the New Perspectives deck is pretty low. Secondly, it works super well with New Perspectives. Being a 5-mana tutor means that on turn 5, we can just tutor for our New Perspectives, untap turn 6, New Perspectives, win the game, and if we already have our New Perspectives or whatever, then we can just cycle our Ritual away. There's not really any cost to it. We could also even use it if we make enough mana to search up our win condition, win a little bit faster. Also gives us the potential, if we have the combo set up, we can search out a Drakehaven, potentially, to avoid the hate, or search up a negate to protect the combo. So I think it easily slots into the New Perspectives deck. As far as showing up in other decks, I think it's too expensive, but I could be wrong, because cycling makes it much easier to slot one of these into your deck, search up a Nicole Bolas or something, and if you don't need it, you just cycle it away for 1 mana. So 1 mana cycling means it's super easy to play this in your deck. So we'll see where it turns out. I think it's going to be worse than Dark Petition, but better than a lot of the other tutors we've seen, thanks to the cycling cost. Couple more cards to talk about today. Vizier of the Anointed is kind of a lord almost for an Embalm or Eternalize deck. When it enters the battlefield, you get to tutor an Embalm or Eternalize card into your graveyard, and then whenever you Embalm or Eternalize, you get to draw a card. So this is a good payoff for the Embalm/Eternalize deck. We do have some good targets for it in Standard. Angel of Sanctions, maybe Temet becomes a thing, Adore and Pouncer. The problem with playing Vizier of the Anointed in Standard, though, is all the Embalm costs are really expensive, and Vizier itself is pretty expensive. I'd be much more excited about it if it was maybe a 3-mana 1/3 rather than a 4-mana 2/4. I think that 4 mana is just too much for it to really be good in Standard, but it could show up if there's a deck that really values Embalm and Eternalize. The challenge, though, is the curve. So many of the Embalm and Eternalize costs are 5, 6, 7 mana that it's hard to play a ton of them in your deck and have your primary plan being to Embalm or Eternalize them. Instead, you want to play ones that are good on their front half and then just use Embalm or Eternalize as extra value. That said, Vizier of the Anointed is probably a staple in Limited for the Embalm/Eternalize archetype, and a huge boon there, like first pickable if you're really forcing into that, or if you're Impact 2 and you're already heading down the path of being like blue-white Embalm Eternalize. I think this is an easy card that you would draft very highly in Limited. We also have Consign to Oblivion, which is Disperse on the front half, and then Mind Rot on the back half. And the reason I like this card is it's exactly the same cost as Disperse. It's an instant, it's 2 mana. The aftermath effect on this one is 100% upside. There's no downside to playing it. So I think if you would ever consider putting Disperse in your deck in Standard, you just play Consign over it. There's no reason not to play Consign over Disperse. Of course, Disperse isn't really seeing play right now, but if we get into some situation where Disperse is a playable card, you just automatically play Consign to Oblivion. Also very good in Limited as well. Finally, our last card for today, Omnious Sphinx, is another Limited-only card. It's an Air Elemental, which is a good Limited card. 5 mana, 4/4 flyer, has some upside in the cycling deck to help keep you alive, cycle, trim down your opponent's power on their creatures so you don't take as much damage, but literally no chance of this seeing play in Constructed, so sweet and Limited, but that's about all. Anyway, that's been our Hour of Devastation spoilers for today. So what do you think? How good is Hour of Eternity? What do you want to do with that card? What potential does it have? Is the new tutor going to be a standard staple? Will it show up in decks, or is it just a new perspective things? What about Vizier of the Anointed? Is it cheap enough to make Eternalize and Embalm a real thing in Standard? Any of the other cards, Endless Sands, can you imagine playing that in your decks? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.